Welcome to this week's edition of Journalist Roundtable. I'm Francine Schertzer. Our guests this week are Lindsay Weber, reporter with The Morning Call, Justin Sweitzer, managing editor of City and State Pennsylvania, and Stephen Caruso, Capitol reporter with Spotlight PA. Stephen, we'll start with you this week. Last Sunday, state police arrested a man accused of setting fire to the governor's residence. What do we know about what happened?
Well, what we know so far from a handful of search warrants, affidavits from the arresting officers, and interviews with his relatives is that Cody Balmer, a 38-year-old mechanic and welder, and a Harrisburg resident, went to the governor's grounds around 2 p.m. Sunday morning. This is as the governor slept in the governor's mansion alongside his family and some guests. It's just been after a Passover Seder, so a celebratory meal to honor the holiday, a Jewish holiday, and Balmer broke in with a hammer after scaling a fence, threw some homemade incendiary devices in. It set the building alight and then was able to escape. Police responding to it, including the state police, Capitol Police, local fire, they managed to evacuate all the guests. No one was hurt. The mansion, though, has been the bottom floor has basically been gutted. We're still getting a sense of the damages. Balmer, actually, according to a Penn Live search warrant, called 911 himself. And noted, you'll know where to find me. He said that he had what he brought up at the time was criticism of the governor's Israel policy. He then turned himself in later Sunday. Look, we are also, though, still picking apart Balmer's past. His Facebook shows a person who's just kind of vaguely a median voter who liked to share memes and posts that showed no clear ideology. His brother has said he tried to get people to vote for Trump in 2024. He shared posts critical of Trump, critical of Biden, critical of the Republicans, Democrats, Big Pharma. Go down the list of boogeymen politically. He shared them, but he's in custody. Shapiro is shaken, but he's been doing public appearances. He's unharmed. He's been talking through it in even an event yesterday in Hershey. And so far now, Balmer faces 8 charges, including attempted murder, terrorism, and assorted others. So that's most of what we know, but there's still a lot that's unknown. Like I said, there's a lot of open questions about Balmer, and we're still kind of piecing through how this happened, how he got onto the governor's grounds, and what's going to come next.
Justin, you covered this story as well. What do we know about, if you could talk maybe briefly about the governor's security protocols and how this alleged arsonist was able to access the grounds and set the residence on fire?
Right. So based on police documents and court documents that we have so far, what we know is that Balmer appeared to scale a fence along Geiger Street, which is kind of a small alley-like street on the side of the governor's mansion. And he actually walked from his home, I believe, in the Pembroke area of this region. So, according to these documents, he walked about an hour, scaled the fence, broke windows using the hammer that Stephen referenced, and then from there used Molotov cocktail devices to set the fires, and he did make it into the residence, which I think is a big concern that is going to be discussed and examined in the months to come. And the state police did say they're going to conduct a wide-ranging review on how this happened. They did say that they're going to employ a third party to examine this whole situation. And as for how the setup goes, I believe I think Stephen did some work on this. I think he might have a little more knowledge to the detail itself. But state police are tasked with protecting the governor, and it's clear there are some questions. Questions around what happened on Sunday, given that it was such a terrible situation, and that police asked him if he got into the building or if he encountered the governor, what would he do, and he alluded to that he would have beat the governor with the hammer. So it's a horrible situation, and I think we'll be learning more soon about what happens next with the state police.
Stephen, you want to talk a little bit more about the state police detail? And in particular, do you have any insight into whether or not there'll be repercussions within the state police for the security breach?
Look, repercussions are hard to say. So far, the governor has just repeatedly said he still has full faith in the state police, in law enforcement. But the governor, all governors since the 1940s, in fact, have been protected by this executive security detail, a specialty group of specially trained, selected officers who accompany the governor and lieutenant governor, and anywhere they go in the state, on public business, on their private political business, on whatever, to ensure their safety. Now, their job is definitely more to just ensure that the governor is in a sticky situation. They're pulled out real quick. But these are the sort of folks where if you've ever been to a public event and you've seen a Secret Service looking guy to the governor's left or right, this is who we're talking about. They've been doing their job for decades. What will happen with this detail, I think, is another one of those fundamental questions that Spotlight PA is asking. I think many people around the Capitol are asking. But I think that it is sort of everyone's waiting for a third-party review, which the governor said is going to occur. The details of that review might not be released to the public, according to the PSP. They're going to weigh a lot of factors, but at minimum, the governor's office is going to get them, and this detail does report to the governor.
The governor's held a couple of press conferences since last Sunday's events. Can you talk a little bit about his handling of the events and what it tells about both his character as a person as well as a political figure?
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, the governor was shaken after this event. And, I think we clearly saw a side to him that, we don't always see with the governor. We often see someone who, is, focused on policy, focused on, representing Pennsylvania, being, a head of state of sorts. And, he was, I think, sad, surprised, shocked, angry. And, that kind of translated into this ongoing condemnation of political violence from him. That was what he said on Sunday. He said this type of violence is not okay, regardless of, motivations behind it. And, he's kind of continued on with that message as the week has gone on. Speaking at a press conference in Hershey this week, I believe, he reiterated that message, and, he's pointed to Butler, PA, with the assassination attempt against President Donald Trump. Even, Luigi Mangione getting arrested in Altoona, pointing to these instances of political violence across, Pennsylvania and the U.S. And, I think that's something he'll probably focus on as this goes on, because we are seeing these instances, whether it's in Pennsylvania or beyond. And, that seems to be the tone he's striking right now, is condemning that, trying to cool the temperature. And, we'll see how, his demeanor and his tone might change as the weeks go on.
And if I were to add anything, Francine, I'd add that the governor, I think what's come out repeatedly in this, but was clear beforehand, is, he is a family man. He sees himself as that. He talks about his family constantly. His wife and his kids were there. This was a religious holiday for him. They were celebrating this in the governor's mansion, which he has used as a place to try and celebrate the state, whether it's, for the statecraft of hosting people they're trying to land economic development deals with, or for galas to, celebrate different groups, different folks who've contributed to the Commonwealth. And he was doing that in this context, and that's when the fire started. So it wasn't even just a threat against him, it was a threat against his family. I think he's really emphasized that in his public remarks, and I think that's really come across as how much what I think has given him so much pause is not just the fact that he himself was at risk, but his family was at risk on Sunday morning.
And that's a good point, Stephen. I think he's made himself a little more accessible in terms of the mansion and the use of that mansion and doing events at that mansion than, past governors. And I think since taking office, he's really, you've seen him, he's posted pictures, tossing a football with his kid in the backyard. And, it's not uncommon to see, the governor taking a walk with, a dog and his wife. I've seen that a couple of times in Harrisburg. And, this whole situation just raises questions about, what happens next in terms of security. Does the governor's mansion get security upgrades? I think that'll be, another conversation that could be had in the future.
I'd like to shift our focus. Lindsay, you've been writing about Congressman Ryan McKenzie. He recently appeared at a CNN town hall meeting. Can you talk a little bit about some of the issues that came up, and in particular, how the congressman is reacting to some of the Trump administration policies?
Sure. So that CNN town hall was last week, and that included Representative Ryan McKenzie and a few other representatives, both Republicans and Democrats, but all from very competitive districts. And as we know, Representative Ryan McKenzie represents the 7th district in Pennsylvania. That's always, a race that is decided by a really razor-thin margin. Ryan McKenzie narrowly ousted Susan Wild, the incumbent Democrat. That was last November. And so it did feel like Representative McKenzie was kind of on the defense on some of those questions. I mean, people asked about the tariffs and how that was going to affect particularly the automobile business. In Lehigh Valley, there's, plenty of dealerships, and, McKenzie was largely, defending and supporting Trump's tariffs. But at the same time, he is kind of walking a fine line with some of Trump's actions, which, he seems to be careful not to, come out with any sort of strong rebukes of Trump, knowing, that the party is largely loyal to him. But he has, raised some concerns with what's been going on with the White House. I think one of them was, Elon Musk's access to people's sensitive Social Security information through the Department of Government Efficiency. He did, raise concerns about that, but, largely pointed to a court ruling that, ruled that they should not have access to that kind of sensitive information. So his position is, there are some concerns that he has, but at the same time, he kind of trusts in the court process to ensure that, lines aren't being crossed legally by the White House and by the Trump administration. So he's been raising concerns, but, largely trying to back President Donald Trump and also Elon Musk's, efforts to cut down on so-called wasteful spending. He is, largely trying to defend that while also, pointing to some concerns here and there.
I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the Trump administration policies and how they're being addressed or handled here in Pennsylvania. Now, Lindsay, you write about the Lehigh Valley. You had written recently that the Allentown City Council was considering a resolution to make it a sanctuary city for trans persons. How would that status align with any national laws that seek to criminalize gender-affirming care?
Right. So that's a good question, because that move in the Allentown City Council, which was actually approved last night, that is a resolution. So I think in, a lot of people's view, that isn't necessarily legally binding, but, a little bit more of a symbolic move from Allentown officials to show that the city is supportive of trans people and their right to access healthcare, gender-affirming healthcare. But, whether or not that would truly legally protect, transgender people seeking gender-affirming care, if there was some kind of nationwide ban on that kind of healthcare or that kind of procedure, it's hard to say. But I don't know that, a city resolution would necessarily be able to override something that was done at the federal or even state level.
And Francine, like on that issue too, we have, UPMC, the state's largest employer, has said that they're not offering it to youth who are seeking gender affirming care. And this is a policy that's going to impact. I mean, UPMC, largest employer, has hospitals all over the state, particularly the western half. They're creeping in the central Pennsylvania as well. This has drawn a lot of critics from the LGBTQ plus community. 57 state lawmakers even signed a letter to UPMC asking for them to rescind this policy, but they're doing it because the federal government said that federal dollars, which often flow into healthcare, are going to be tied to whether they do follow an executive order Trump signed to try and reduce options for kids who are looking for trans kids who are looking for treatment. So this is the thing, there's going to be a lot of power of the purse, I think we're going to see used. And that's sort of, I think, been the story of these first couple months of the Trump administration, is not only, is that mix of the federal money puts so many federal dollars come into so many different areas. And when you start putting conditions on them, it changes a lot of ways that people function, from the private sector to the public sector.
Earlier this month, there were 1,400 same-day rallies referred to themselves as hands-off, where they're protesting Trump policies. Do these rallies have any influence either on influencing our members of Congress or members of our federal government?
So I think that's a good question. And I was out in the Lehigh Valley. That was, I think, almost 2 weeks ago now. And there was 3 of those types of protests kind of scattered throughout the whole region. One of them, or 2 of them, were actually outside of Congressman Ryan McKenzie's office. Hundreds, in some cases, even up to 1,000 people, I think, estimated at these. Largely just people, soliciting like honks of support from people driving by. It's more of so like a show of strength, a show of resistance in, the protesters' view to show that people are opposed to, some of what's going on in the Trump administration. Like some of the main concerns that I'm hearing about are, what's going on with the Department of Government Efficiency, but also, Ukraine, the potential for cuts to programs like Medicaid. While at the same time, I think Ryan McKenzie's view has been, these are largely Democratic backed, which makes it, easier for him to kind of dismiss as a partisan attack. So he hasn't really made an effort to directly address, the fact that these demonstrations are going on, while at the same time, he has held a telephone town hall, and responding to constituents' questions in that kind of way, but not necessarily accepting an invitation to actually come to like a protest or a town hall backed by Democrats, because he sees that and frames it as a partisan attack that doesn't like hold real weight against what the work that he's doing in Congress.
Are there places in state government where you see our members of the General Assembly addressing some sort of trickle-down effect from policies that the Trump administration is pursuing?
I know at least one state lawmaker, House Appropriations Chair Jordan Harris, is hosting a town hall coming up to talk about what's going on at the federal level and how that may impact local government, in Philadelphia and beyond. And I know other state elected officials, including members of Congress on the Democratic side, are hosting town halls. So I think you are seeing these forums begin to pop up, outside of just these protests. And I agree with Lindsay. I think by and large they are, a show of strength. They might not result in any direct policy changes right away, but I think it is at least a way for people to show government leaders that they have concerns.
And I think going back to the idea of federal dollars, which, like I said, permeate the economy, we've seen Governor Josh Shapiro wage a few lawsuits, and they come directly from his office, not the Attorney General Dave Sunday, who's a Republican. He's skewed that. He hasn't necessarily said it's out of any fealty to Trump, but I think he's just said it as like, I don't see the role of my office is to file gotcha lawsuits every time I see something happen that I might not like. But Shapiro has waged a legal campaign, filed a handful to try and go after small but meaningful pots of money is probably how they paraphrase it, like, looking at money for DEP for well plugging or specific dollars for education. So we've seen Shapiro do that, but we also we're starting to get into the state's budget cycle. It's due June 30th, and federal dollars undergird a lot of what the state does. They're not on budget. They're not approved necessarily always in the spending document that lawmakers vote on, but things from education to transportation to healthcare and mental health for all like things that get some federal dollars in some form and in some form. And if those are lost, the state is already is in a tricky financial situation where we have surplus, but it can't cover everything. And if those federal dollars go away, the state can't backfill everything. And this is not a Pennsylvania issue. This is every state's going to deal with this. If the Department of Government Efficiency and has their way, or, Congress does go after Medicaid. But these are problems that every single state is going to face. And Pennsylvania is definitely one of them. And I don't think many lawmakers have addressed them. But in some ways, I don't know what there is to address. It'd be like asking you to balance your budget after someone halves their salary. It's just like, how do you do that? You're talking about structural change there. You're not talking about, cutting back in a few places to torture the metaphor of the state as a family that needs to cut its budget.
Justin, you wrote that Senator Doug Mastriano is sponsoring a bill to create a Pennsylvania version of the Department of Government Efficiency. How's that being received by his colleagues?
I imagine some conservative and Republican lawmakers are supportive of that idea. To my knowledge, that legislation has not gone anywhere yet. But I think it mirrors efforts in other states. We've seen state level efforts, particularly in states with Republican governors, where they're creating their own offices similar to Musk's Doge effort at the federal level. And, I think the thing to keep in mind with, Mastriano's bill is that ultimately this would have to get through both chambers. So even if it passes the Senate, there's no guarantee that the Democratic-led House or, Shapiro, a Democratic governor, would sign this into law. But, I'm curious to see if this is something the Senate will prioritize as this, conservative-led efficiency push continues across the country, because it seems like it is trickling down to the state level.
Back in March, there were 2 special elections in the General Assembly. Of note in particular, Democrat James Malone won a Lancaster County seat that was previously held by Republicans since the 1980s. What's significant about this race in particular?
Well, I think what's significant is, the seat hasn't been held since the 1980s by a Democrat. And if you go back even further, Lancaster County has not elected a Democrat to a state Senate seat since I believe it was the 1890s, according to the Lancaster Online. So that's a big shake. And now look, this is a big shakeup. This is a special election that has a specialized electorate. It was early in Trump's era. When you talk to the Democratic organizers in that area, they said they specifically went and talked to every Democrat they could find to say, this is your chance to do something symbolically even to stand up to Trump and Elon Musk. Turnout was on their side. And what also needs to be said is the Republican candidate, Josh Parsons, county commissioner, was very vocal. He's a very vocal Trump ally. He picked lots of fights over a lot of cultural issues. So when you look at it, it's hard to say what I think it represents other than, the Republicans didn't love their candidate. Democrats were energized to go to the polls. But if there's one thing I'm keeping an eye on is that James Malone, the local mayor who won the seat, he's going to be running for re-election in 2026. Democrats, if they want to flip the Senate, like that just makes their map a little bit easier. Shapiro won this seat in 2022. So he's on the ballot again. Lancaster is a county that's been changing a bit. And Republicans, to flip a seat, you got to invest significant resources, and those are resources that then can't go to protecting other vulnerable incumbents. So it changes the math for Democrats' path to try and take another run for the umpteenth time at flipping the state Senate.
Does Senator Malone's win have broader implications politically?
I mean, yeah, I think, that state Senate map, the money that has to be spent, that's a big deal. I would say broader than that, South Central Pennsylvania has been changing, but I don't want to get over my skis because, the electorate's a fickle thing and they move and shift in many ways, and it's a low turnout election. So it's sometimes hard to extrapolate, but I think it's sort of the result that political scientists and folks who follow politics would almost expect, is that once one party gets power, the electorate slowly starts to be like, wait, do we have buyer's remorse, or at least the people who want to turn out to vote will have that?
Looking ahead a bit, Lindsay, you wrote that former U.S. Representative Susan Wild announced that she will not run for re-election to the seat that she had previously held. Has anybody else stepped up so far to challenge Ryan McKenzie?
That's right. So the only candidate that we have right now that, has declared and filed paperwork is Lamont McClure. He is the Northampton County executive. He is, courting a lot of support, I think, from local unions and, really trying to emphasize his pro-labor record while a Northampton County executive. So he's officially in the race, but it looks like Susan Wild, although she's not running herself, she is supporting another candidate who I've heard will announce officially, I think maybe around 2 weeks from today. And that is, a candidate. I think Susan Wild has come out and said she's seeking, a woman to kind of prop up and support to run in the Democratic primary against Lamont McClure.
Beyond local races, there are judicial statewide races this year, one for Commonwealth, one for Superior, and then 3 retentions on Supreme Court. Are these races getting any attention right now?
I would say probably not to the extent of some of the other stories going on in Pennsylvania right now, but I think, the court races will heat up. I think we've seen, a lot of big money pour into state court races in other parts of the country. I know, Elon Musk invested in Wisconsin Supreme Court races. So, it's not something I've dug into too deeply so far, but, I think courts are always a big deal. And I think, in the age of a second Trump administration, when a lot of policies are getting challenged and, offices are getting sued, I think, this is going to heat up rather quickly.
Yeah, if those 3 seats on the state Supreme Court are not retained, they're all elected as Democrats, and that could lead to elections in 2027 that would decide if Democrats or Republicans take control. So it's a big deal. I'm expecting a ton of money to come in these races.
Stephen, what will you be working on this coming week?
Well, it's still picking apart the arson. I should mention, Balmer has mental health issues. I'm interested to see how lawmakers respond to those. The safe mental health system is, an issue that a lot of folks want to talk about. It's something Shapiro has, I think, put more money into in past budget. So keeping an eye on that and just other fallout that comes from that.
And where can your viewers find your work?
At spotlightpa.org.
Justin Sweitzer, similar question. What will you be working on?
Yeah, I'll have some coverage coming out on the mayoral race out in Pittsburgh. So I have a couple interviews that'll be dropping, and I'm very excited for those to see the light of day.
And where can we find your work?
You can find our work at cityandstatepa.com, or you can also subscribe to our newsletter.
And finally, Lindsay, we come to you. What will you be working on?
Sure. So I'm also looking at some of the competitive, specifically Democratic primaries here in the Lehigh Valley. There'll be a debate this evening between Allentown Mayor Matt Turk and City Councilman Ed Zuckel, who's challenging him. I'll be looking at that. I'll also be looking at some of the crowded races for Allentown and Bethlehem City Council and Bethlehem Mayor as well.
And where can we find your work?
Sure. So our website is mcall.com, MCALL.com, or pick up a copy, wherever you find your newsstands around Lehigh Valley.
Our guests have been Lindsay Weber, reporter with The Morning Call, Justin Sweitzer, managing editor for City and State PA, and Stephen Caruso, Capitol reporter with Spotlight PA. Thank you all for joining us this week. I'm Francine Schertzer. Thank you for watching.